Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to get through the first god-awful hour of this movie. Because if you can, you will be rewarded with 2 of the best sequences they've ever had in the Mission Impossible franchise. Plus, 1 fight sequence where Tom Cruise spends the entire sequence in his underwear, doing his best Jean-Claude Van Damme. Did I ever tell you my Jean-Claude Van Damme story, which I think about every time I see or hear about Jean-Claude Van Damme? Well, when I was little, a little tyke, my parents, because they're awesome, took me to see Time Cop. My parents took me to see all types of movies my whole life, which is what made me a movie fan. So we went to see Time Cop, and I remember going into the theater. This was back in the day, New York City, single screen theater, stuff like that. This one was on 3rd Avenue near 57th Street. And I noticed there were a lot of men in the theater when I went to see Time Cop. I was like, wow, there sure are a lot of guys in here. And then when Jean-Claude Van Damme in that kitchen sequence did a split in his underwear, I remember all those men cheering. And it was a hoot. And I still, as I said, remember that to this day. I can see that experience, in fact, even though I was so little. Now, Tom Cruise doesn't show off that much. And in fact, while Tom Cruise can certainly do an awful lot, I don't know if he can do a split. But he does spend a surprising amount of time during this movie with his shirt off. At 62, you go, Tom. I wonder why he made that choice. Is he trying to prove that he still got it as a sex symbol? And he does. But it was a very interesting choice because, typically Tom Cruise doesn't do that kind of stuff or hasn't in the past. But here he was like, maybe I'll take my shirt off for this scene. And nobody complained. As I said, he looks great. The one thing I didn't like about the way he looked in this movie, though, was his longer hair. Somebody even makes a comment about it. I was like, I'm calling human resources, Haley Atwell. I don't think you're supposed to comment on your fellow agent's hair. But I was like, also, I disagree with you. His longer hair does not look good. It looked pretty bad a number of times during the film, particularly when there was wind. That hairstyle, it almost turned into a bowl cut at some times. But what really caught me off guard is that I've never seen anyone in a Mission Impossible movie get mask hair. When he took the rubber mask off, his hair, he needed to zhuzh that hair once he took the mask off. That's something they should discuss in the mission briefing about how things can go better next time. I'd be like, I looked over at you, Ethan. Your hair was very flat and unflattering. You should zhuzh when you take off the rubber mask. Now, as I watched Mission Impossible Final Reckoning, and I saw Tom Cruise showing off and doing all this stuff, he reminded me of another older movie star, and that's Mr. Harrison Ford. And also, the reason Harrison Ford also came to mind while I was watching this movie is that a number of times it seems a little Indiana Jones-like as well. But that franchise is also trying to age gracefully, but failing horribly. Mission Impossible, though, while not perfect this time around, I think because of filming issues due to COVID and some other things, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. But for the most part, Mission Impossible still has the magic. Although, to be fair, Harrison Ford is 20 years older than Tom Cruise. But, Crystal Skull was also a mess, and that happened to be made when Ford himself was around 62. Ford was 66 for Crystal Skull. Tom Cruise here is 62. All right, so let's talk about why the first hour of this film, the first hour is just so bad. It's awful, but don't worry, no spoilers. No spoilers. And while we have a moment, why not hit that like and subscribe button? If you're subscribed to Beyond the Trailer, you'll know as soon as my spoiler review and box office report drop for Mission Impossible Final Reckoning, which will be next week. The reason the review embargo is lifting so early is not only because it's debuting at the Cannes Film Festival, but because it's also opening overseas in several countries. So this is a spoiler-free review, but beware spoilers out there. So, as you might recall, because there's been a lot of coverage about this, because this is such a mess, but Mission Impossible 7 and 8 were supposed to be filmed back to back so they could be released in, they are still being released in pretty close succession. But, it's a two-parter, right? Even though they've tried to seriously downplay that because it's not going so well. But the reason that they've had a lot of problems with the production for this movie is that it ended up being one of the worst productions hit by COVID, and then it got hit again with the writers and then actors strike. So production had to stop and start multiple times. As a result, the budget for this movie has ballooned to around $400 million. They're saying it could be anywhere from 3 to 4, but it's probably closer to 4. That would give Mission Impossible Final Reckoning a break-even point where they just don't lose money on it at like $1 billion. Now, not only has no Mission Impossible movie ever made $1 billion, with the last one coming in significantly under $1 billion, but this one, I'm afraid, isn't good enough to make $1 billion. It's not going to make $1 billion, which is too bad. I hope that maybe it could recoup its expenses down the line on digital and streaming. But there's nothing. I would have spent a little bit more to fix the first hour, to be honest with you. I'm like, we're already in it. Let's at least make sure that the movie is 100% watchable. All right. And then this two-parter got hit again last year, actually it's been 2 years. 2 years ago with Barbenheimer, right? With very few people seeing part 1 as a result. Did you see part 1? You don't actually have to have seen part 1 to watch this movie, because the first hour, and here's what's wrong with it, it's a patch job, a serious patch job. There's tons of exposition, and they're clearly pasting together bits and pieces to try and get the film back on its feet, this franchise. The result is a film that, again, for the first hour, feels small, very small in scope, action, and budget. You can tell that these scenes are a mix of ones salvaged from what they initially shot in the editing room. They're like, well, maybe we can use parts of this. And then also, I think, last-minute pickups to help, try and, as I said, piece this thing together and catch people up to watch the second part of a 2-part story where very few people saw part 1. I mean, it does catch you up. You don't have to, as I said, to have seen part 1 to watch this film. But it feels extremely exposition-y and like I said, like a patch job. You know what else it feels like? The first half of season 1 of Daredevil Born Again, which was also clearly a patch job, as they tried to salvage some of the footage that they'd done from the first time that they tried to make the show and failed. They were like, well, we can't throw all of this out because it would be too... I don't know. I know that these budgets are lately out of control, but I think there's also something to be said for the damage that's done for releasing something that's not good. And maybe sometimes you just have to lump it, because this, not good. I did, though, enjoy the nostalgia that's present for the first hour of the movie. There is a lot of footage from the first 7 Mission Impossible movies. And if you're a fan of this franchise, that's very cozy. It's a little walk down memory lane. But again, it also catches you up, so you have to really do no homework to watch this movie. I mean, I know some of you have enjoyed rewatching all the Mission Impossible movies, and they're great for the most part, so I'm sure you had a great time. But if you haven't had a minute to do that, and there are a lot of references in this film to, previous entries, don't worry. They show you the part they're talking about. Unlike other franchises, Tom Cruise isn't afraid to show you a clip to catch you up in the moment. And I think that does help. In fact, though, I would say the first hour of this movie, is so bad that it made me nervous about people falling asleep in the theater, walking out, or down the line when it's on digital and streaming, turning it off. But don't do that. I mean, again, we've talked about, Jerry Seinfeld again has a joke about why should he watch something if like a large chunk of it isn't good. But if you like this kind of movie, if you're excited about the new Mission Impossible film, it gets really good down the line. It is really, I would say 2/3 of this film, well, it's 2 hours, 40 minutes. First hour or so is awful, but then the rest of it's really good. I would say that, so if you're wondering, maybe, you can use this first part of the movie to eat your snacks, go to the bathroom. I would say that when Ethan Hunt turns himself into the authorities, when he surrenders, again, about an hour into the movie, that's when it gets really good. Now, usually in these Mission Impossible movies, Ethan Hunt and his team are working against the government and the military, and sometimes their own superiors. But what's different this time around, and I found very refreshing, is that because it's potentially the end of the world, the AI villain here, the entity, plans to trigger Armageddon, going full Skynet. So this time around, the government and the military want to work with Ethan Hunt. They're like, we'll back you up. And so that kind of like opened up a whole new level for these Mission Impossible films. Because you have a secret agent working with, in this film, specifically the Navy, an aircraft carrier, and a submarine. So the good men and women of the Navy are helping Ethan Hunt go where he needs to go, and finding out as much as they can. They know they don't have full clearance for the mission, but Ethan Hunt respects them and lets them in a little bit on what's happening. So this not only ups Ethan Hunt's game and allows him to do some even cooler stuff than usual, but you have this aspect where there's a mystery for the armed forces people as to who is this guy? Like, who is this guy amongst us, right? Like, he's passing by. He's alone. Well, he has a team, but for a lot of this movie, he's a lone wolf. So he's just passing through, and they're not only kind of get to see him, but help him on his way with their own resources and abilities. And so I like that. I think it was really nice to see this show of camaraderie in a world where today there's very little of that. Although the movie is commenting on that because the AI, of course, it expects everyone to fight with each other because that's what we do now. So, of course, the only way to thwart the AI's assumptions is to do what normally people never would do, which is be nice to each other and help each other out. But I really liked it. I really liked that positivity. Like the last film, these Mission Impossible movies are cutting edge in that they're not only the first Hollywood film. Well, there's been a lot of AI in Hollywood movies. For instance, Terminator is one of them. But here, Mission Impossible has a very realistic AI villain because suddenly Skynet doesn't feel that far-fetched. But Mission Impossible, these two entries have taken the time to really outline what the AI would do. And it sounds a lot like stuff that's actually happening in real life. Now, while that's fascinating and very ripped from the headlines, at the same time, I think it does make these two films feel sometimes a little too close for comfort. Like, I do wonder if this AI villain and the frank and negative discussion that comes about in terms of the internet and the way technology is being used today might turn off some people who are pro-technology, who like that kind of stuff. Maybe they might take offense. But personally, I feel these discussions are important and I don't see any lies here. As I watched this latest entry in the Mission Impossible franchise, it occurred to me that the tagline for this franchise could be, Ethan Hunt always draws the short straw. Because he is asked here to do impossible things, seemingly impossible things. They don't call it Mission Impossible for nothing. But here, most of the things seem absurdly dangerous and just so unlikely to work. They're crazy. Like, the fact that anybody has to do this seems insane. And you kind of get the feeling that the world, when these things come up, seems to always turn to Ethan Hunt and say, you do it. And to his credit, he always does. But on that note, as this franchise, like many franchises, because, they want to keep these franchises around, but the stars are getting older. So it does address that to a degree with Ethan. And new members are joining the team, who I absolutely love. I love the new members. But if this franchise is to go forward, and they leave the door open for that, because of course they do, I think there should be some discussion going forward about training Ethan Hunt's replacement. Who will draw the short straw going forward when Ethan Hunt no longer can? Because the movie makes a big point of Ethan's instincts, like how good they are. Like he just knows, he has a feeling. Like he trusts his gut, and his gut really knows what it's doing. And, I don't even know if that can always be taught, but you would think he would try to pass that along to someone to some degree. Now, his team does show a remarkable selflessness many times during this film, just like Ethan Hunt does, which is really admirable. There's a line that they put in here where they're saying they're saving people they'll never meet. And it reminded me, because Andor, of course, just wrapped up in season 2, but it reminded me of Luthen's famous line from that. Well, semi-famous, because a lot of people aren't watching Andor either. But, of course, when Luthen said, I burn my life to make a sunrise I'll never see. And to the degree almost where I was like, you're kind of ripping off Luthen's line, and I wish more people were aware of that line. And I think Luthen's works a little bit better. It's a little more poetic, to be honest with you. But I like that they're highlighting this noble sacrifice, showing, but it's a contrast as well, because Andor, of course, is showing that's something that revolutionaries do. But Mission Impossible is saying that sometimes people who work for the government make that sacrifice as well. And I suppose it depends on your worldview, if you're willing to acknowledge and consider that perhaps sometimes they're selfless, heroic people who do work for the government that's in place. And remember, in the world of Mission Impossible, they don't follow the government blindly. They're often, deciding that the marching orders or the mission is wrong and taking matters into their own hands. And that's even something that's discussed here. And I think in a very well done way. But don't worry, as I said, this is the non-spoiler review. Surprisingly, there's not a ton of action here for a movie that's almost 3 hours long and that they're saying you need to see it in IMAX. I mean, that said, though, the two sequences that I said were spectacular, the submarine deep dive and the biplane aerial battle, those probably do look pretty amazing in IMAX. Although I have to tell you, my press screening, I couldn't make the IMAX press screening. They did show it on a baby IMAX here in New York City for the first press screening. But I couldn't make that, so I went to a later one, which was the Dolby Screening Room here in New York City, which has Dolby Picture and Sound, so it looks and sounds amazing, but it's actually a pretty small screen. However, I still had an incredible time. The biplane sequence, which has been largely used to promote this film, is pretty good. This was the part of the film that particularly reminded me of Indiana Jones, not just because that plane is from that time period, but Cruise has the leather jacket on, and also he gets covered in what looks, I think it's sand or it's some kind of mineral dust or whatever, but it looked very much like, it reminded me a lot of some Indiana Jones sequences. Although, of course, with the added Tom Cruise trademark willingness to risk his life for our entertainment. And I have to say, he does really up the sequence with those antics. You're like, wow, he's really out there. He's getting the face, with the wind. It was funny. It was good. It was a very good sequence. But to me, the real standout sequence for this movie is the submarine deep dive. Oh, that was something special. I can't wait to see this again. I've watched a number of submarine movies. I like submarine movies. I think they're really good. So I've seen a lot of the stuff that Hollywood can dream up to happen in a submerged submarine. I never saw any of this, though. They managed to really surprise me. This was a thrilling sequence. I was on the edge of my seat, glued to the screen. It was, I would say, this is the same screening room where I not only saw the last Mission Impossible, but I also saw Top Gun Maverick there. And this sequence was as good as Top Gun Maverick. This was really, really a great sequence. I was really impressed with this sequence. It's also a very long and therefore satisfying sequence. I feel that Mission Impossible Final Reckoning is worth seeing for this sequence alone, which I would probably say is maybe about, maybe 20 minutes. It's great. It's really, really good. There are also some fight sequences throughout the film. There's that longer one with Tom Cruise in his underwear. But also, in addition to his antics, Pom Klementieff and Greg Tarzan Davis, they give Ethan Hunt's team something that hasn't really had before, and that's muscle. This is an assassin and a soldier, basically, who really can fight. And usually Ethan Hunt's the one who has to do almost all the fighting. That's usually been his sole responsibility. Everybody has a different job. But here, this time the team has a little overlap, which I appreciated, and also allows them to be able to split up. But I really loved seeing Klementieff and Davis go to work. They were both really fantastic. I was like, they can handle it. They were great. And on that note, now let's move over to the cast. I'm curious to see who shows up for this movie demographic-wise, because just like he did with Top Gun Maverick, although I would say even more so here, Tom Cruise is really working to have a very representative film, particularly with gender and ethnicity. He doesn't have any overtly LGBTQ characters in the film, but there are several actors who are openly LGBTQ. And it doesn't come off as preachy. I think it felt very organic. For instance, one great example is when you see the president and her advisors. And when you just look at that room, I was like, what a cool group of people. I was like, what a great representation of what I just really loved it. I just thought it was really, really fantastic. And I can speak to how I felt as a woman watching the film, because I thought not only did I feel represented, but I really liked the way I was being represented. I was like, all these ladies are awesome. Oh, wow. The women featured in this movie, not only is there a wide range of women, but I would say that each and every one of them plays an important role in the mission. They're team players, which I really appreciated. They didn't work against the group. They worked with the group. They all looked fabulous on screen. And I think they all earned their spot, not only within the story of the film, but as actresses. I loved the respect that was being given to them. And it's great. This is a great change of pace for a franchise that at one point was called out for only recasting its female lead from entry to entry. All the guys got to come back, but of course there was always a new female lead. And they changed that with Rebecca Ferguson's Ilsa Faust, although that also became a problem because they infamously killed that character off for seemingly, I think, it felt very unfair. A lot of us were very upset when Ilsa Faust was killed off in the last movie. And it's bittersweet to not see her here. I mean, I can understand that she made it the sacrifice that an agent like herself would make. But that she's not here for this, when the rest of the team is, it was frustrating. And that she was largely forgotten within the context of the film. She pops up just momentarily, very briefly, in like a couple of the flashback. But it's not even sequences, it's just like clips. However, I will say that to have 2 women fully on this team this time, maybe even you could say 3 by the end of the movie, was really refreshing to see, particularly when Hollywood, although Thunderbolts, to its credit, also has a lot of women on its team, but Hollywood typically in the past has had just 1 woman per team. Oh, and by the way, the women are also all age-appropriate matches with Tom Cruise, which was also very refreshing. I hope, by the way, that nobody complains about Angela Bassett playing the president. Other countries have elected female leaders, and one day, I don't know when, but one day, someday, there will be a woman president of the United States. And I think that Angela Bassett makes for a wonderful president. She certainly has the stature from Queen of Wakanda to President of the United States, thank you very much. But the role itself is very complex and well written. She got snubbed for that Oscar, man. I mean, come on, let her shine. She deserves it. So yes, this movie has a huge cast, but again, with a runtime of 2 hours and 40 minutes, almost everyone gets a moment, at least a moment, to shine. Some of them get more than a moment. The long-standing team, of course, is still here. And they're good. They're very good. They've assembled a very good team for Mission Impossible. Simon Pegg, I thought, particularly stood out here, though, not only continuing to do a lot of heavy lifting with the light comedic touch that he brings, but also he's given more responsibility as Ethan's second in command, which I found very satisfying because, of course, his character started his journey in these films as a real fish out of water when it comes to the spy game. So to see him evolve and get his footing and become more self-assured as a spy was really nice to see. And Simon Pegg, I thought, again, earned it, really did a good job. But one of the things I loved so much about this movie, another thing, was how many new people have come out to play for the 2-parter. So here are my favorites, after, of course, Mr. Tom Cruise, who is forever a movie star. So I loved having Hannah Waddingham and Tremel Tillman in this movie. And when they showed up, commanding an aircraft carrier and then a submarine, that really helped to, I think, kick the movie into high gear and energize it. It was just fantastic. I guess Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie watch a lot of Apple TV. But what's even better than seeing these 2 fan favorite characters get to be in a huge blockbuster like this is that they do not seem like their characters on their respective shows. They have it turns out they both have range, and they're used very well here. Just wait until you hear Waddingham's American accent. I was like, wow, that's fantastic. It totally changes her vibe, and I really liked it a lot. And as for Tillman, he's still got his Mr. Milchek flair. I was like, will he ever be able to shave that mustache? And do we want him to? But it's great to see him here as one of the good guys. And he's just fantastic. He was so good. I was glad that they both had, they weren't huge roles, but they weren't just small cameos. They both got a lot to do, and it was fantastic. Pom Klementieff, she was a little bit cliche. I felt she was a little bit of a Harley Quinn ripoff in the last movie. But here she starts to really build her character up into something fantastic and very different from Mantis. So it shows she has a lot of range as an actress. Her final look in the film, I loved it so much. She looks so cool. I was also really happy to see Katie O'Brien here. She doesn't have a big role either. It's small, but it's memorable. She certainly is there long enough to make an impression. You know what? Someone should send her brief scenes to Jimmy C, to James Cameron, because I haven't seen someone this cool in this type of a role since Vasquez. I was like, who will know how to use Katie O'Brien? Mr. James Cameron. She's fantastic. I'm waiting still for Katie O'Brien's career to take off. She's making progress, and I hope this role is helpful here in assuaging anyone who has a concern about her acting ability. Every time I advocate for her, somebody always in the comments says that you don't think that she can act. I I'm all on board the Katie O'Brien train, but I hope that her work here gets more of you to join me on that train, because she's just so fantastic. Now, let's talk about who I didn't like in the film. With all due respect to S.A. Morales, who I've enjoyed in other roles, he's still awful here. He was awful in the last movie, and he's awful yet again. I mean, the role is bad, and he's bad in it. And he is just chewing scenery in an awful, not in a fun way. Like in my press screening, there was a moment I think you'll see it, because everyone in your screening will probably laugh at him when he does it. I mean, it was not good. And then Haley Atwell. It's a real shame what's happened to Haley Atwell. She has been a fantastic Agent Carter. But Marvel, like so many of its characters, particularly, those who are supposed to be representative, has just run that character into the ground and, handled her very poorly and ended up Mary suing her in the worst of ways. And I think that's transferred a little bit to Haley Atwell, which is really unfortunate. I think you think of that when you see her. But she looks great here. I think she's a great actress. I think she has some cool moments. But her role is a bit bland. It's underwritten, as the romantic interest for a male lead often is, and particularly movies that skew a little old school. You're like, all right, we get it. She's just here for Tom Cruise to make googly eyes at. But Ilsa Faust would never. And on that note, I'm still upset with her for replacing Ilsa Faust. I'm like, you're just the Ilsa Faust knockoff. I want Ilsa Faust back. I'm pretty upset about it, particularly because the movie has given them the same frickin' styling. I'm like, why does she even have to look kind of like Ilsa? Like, I don't know I still don't understand why Ilsa Faust couldn't have been here. I mean, there is one specific thing that Haley Atwell's character has to do because it's her specialty, and she did it very well, I must add. But I don't see why Ilsa Faust couldn't have been good at that, and why she couldn't have done it. Or at least, really, I feel it would have been better if the Ilsa Faust replacement didn't seem like Ilsa Faust 2.0, if she just seemed very much like a different character. I think that would help with the pain. I miss you, Ilsa. I miss you so much. All right, so that's my non-spoiler review of Mission Impossible Final Reckoning, a movie that was quite the roller coaster because it started out oh so bad, but by the end was oh so good. I'm glad I saw it, and I do plan to see it again. I've got my tickets. And what plans have you made? What plans did you have? And have you changed them now that we've talked about it in this non-spoiler review for how you're going to see Mission Impossible Final Reckoning? Some of you might be like, on digital or streaming, Grace, or not at all. I don't know, man. That submarine sequence is so good. You really should. But I mean, I guess to be fair, you could wait until it's on digital or streaming and just fast forward to that sequence, because the first hour is pretty bad. All right, so share your thoughts down below. Again, subscribe. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.